machine has appeared in homes across America.
Double and redouble his power. 32.
6 times more powerful than 3DO.
Alright, baby.
40 times more than Super NES.
Hey, yo, there is no 32-bit Super NES. Are we gonna see the games or what? Show me!
Increase the power of the unit 40 times.
Thank you.
Welcome everybody to the premiere episode of the Turbo Duo Cast. My name is Sal Mata. I am your guide and your Sherpa today.
Sherpa. You're the Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer.
Yes, I'm the
to
one.
Our video game sleigh.
That's right. The goal of the Turbo Duo Cast is to explore gaming's history and doing it sort of through a lens of our memories. Our idea of the podcast and the format of the podcast and the content is really to kind of connect us all through gaming's history and all the memories that we all have growing up playing the games of yore and the classic systems.
The RF switch to your TV.
Daisy chaining RF switch. Who remembers daisy chaining an NES to a Genesis to a Super Nintendo RF switch, right? Those kinds of things. And kind of tying that all together in the community that we call classic gaming. So, again, my name is Salvatore Mata. I'm 35 years old. We are here in sunny, wonderful Connecticut. The
Sunshine State, they like to call it.
Yeah, the sunshine. That's where the sun doesn't shine.
The butthole of the U.S.
Oh, man. We still have phone booths here in Hartford.
We only export.
Yeah. Anyways, so again, the nature of the podcast is really to connect with our gaming memories and kind of share those with you guys. And hopefully it resonates with you and is a kind of a fun journey for you to explore with us. So today is our first topic, and we're going to be discussing an interesting console, actually. We may be discussing games in the past and in the future. We may go chronologically with some of our gaming memories. Trenton, who's also on the podcast with me, we grew up sort of in the late 80s, but more so in the early 90s. So we're really looking to talk about, the main consoles of the NES, the Super Nintendo, the Genesis, and
the 16-bit wars.
Yeah, the 16-bit consoles and the 32 and 64-bit consoles, with a smattering maybe of of some of the following consoles.
What a word!
In my opinion, the age of gaming between 1989 and 1999 was really kind of the golden age of game development and ingenuity in the industry and trying new things and kind of the crazy risks that some of these companies took. So it should be a fun little journey that we
talking about you, Phillips, you CDI.
Oh, I think you were talking about Howard Phillips, the game counselor or the game master from NES with that bow tie. My God. Howard Phillips. Remember he was in was it Howard and Nestor? Remember that little comic that they used to have in Nintendo
Nestor
Power?
the Unlikely? Or no, not Nestor.
That's Lester the Unlikely.
No, Nestor's Funky Bowling.
For
Virtual Boy.
Virtual Boy, yes.
Yeah, this little comic strip.
Yes, I did own that game at one point. So again, my name's Sal Mata. I think my favorite games of all time, I think you have to include Super Mario Brothers. Pretty much all the Super Mario games of that era. Super Mario 64. Well, not, Mario is missing. Zelda is one of my favorite games. Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, a lot of the classic Sega titles. Favorite genres would be probably beat 'em ups, platformers, shooters, even though they tear me down and beat me to shit. I'm like a battered prostitute. I just come back for more. I just love it. I can't get enough of it. That's what shooters are. Shooters are it's the hardest genre. I don't care. That's my opinion. Shooters are the hardest genre in gaming, but it's just fun to shoot shit. You know what I mean?
Shoot the shit.
It's just a lot of fun. Anyways, we're gonna discover all that stuff. Trenton, introduce yourself. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are, and what some of your favorite games are.
Well, I am Trenton, always right. 34 3/4.
Yep. Trenton the third,
And the-
actually. You
And
should have
the
included that.
gloomy side of Willimantic, which was every side.
Willimantic, Connecticut, that is.
Yeah. Like favorite games. Man. I mean, WWF No Mercy on Nintendo 64 is probably my all-time favorite because it's the most fun I had playing.
Ladder match.
Yeah. Diggity dog.
Mm.
I think I had like the most fun of playing Nintendo 64 games because it was like 11 and 12 when it came out. Like GoldenEye would probably be another one, which I still actually like today. But then on Genesis, it's probably got to be like Streets of Rage. Just pretty much any beat 'em up game. I mean, Turtles in Time on Super Nintendo.
Definitely.
I just never got into any like RPGs or any more like complex games. I just like to turn it on and just play and go into it. I don't really care about story or anything.
Right. It's very visceral for you. It's all about the meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
None of the glossiness of it. It's just get down to business.
Yeah, that's all we played back then. It was like put your Nintendo 64 in your backpack, ride your bike to your friend's house, and just play multiplayer games, and that was it.
Right. We almost don't even need instructions. It's just get into it.
Yeah. That's why No Mercy was such a great game, because literally anyone can play it. There's like 2 buttons.
Yeah. What was your earliest gaming memory?
Getting my Nintendo system for Christmas in 1989.
So you were 5?
Yeah. It was like a magical moment playing Mario for the first. I don't even remember how I knew about Mario because no one had one.
And
no one had a Nintendo.
You were the oldest child, so it wasn't like you had an older brother.
Yeah, I don't even remember how I knew about it, but I just remember playing that for the first time. And then we had to leave my house that morning, going to my grandma's, and like the whole way there, I was just thinking about getting back and playing Mario.
Salivating.
Just playing Mario. It didn't matter
back.
what else I got that day for Christmas because I was just gonna go back and play more Mario.
Did you get any other games?
No, not when I
Was
first
it the
got. Well,
combo?
it was with the track mat and the.
But you got the trifecta. You got all 3.
Yeah, it came with the mat. Yep.
Oh, and he's
And Duck Hunt.
referencing Duck Hunt. Yeah, Duck Hunt, Mario, and Track and Field, which was a combo card on the Nintendo that came packed in those bundles that came out that time. For me, the earliest memories, and it wasn't even playing, but I've got an older brother who's 4 years older than me, and I can remember, and then I've got an uncle who's 8 years older than me. So he would always be, my uncle Anthony would always be coming over and hanging out and giving suggestions. And I can remember I was probably...
It's like, bro, you gotta check it out, man.
I was probably 3 or 4, and the first console that we ever owned, believe it or not, was an Atari 7800. That was like my first entryway into gaming, and we owned Pole Position 2 and Frogger. Those were the 2 games that we had. I can remember, my first vision of gaming was Frogger on the Atari 2600, but we had it for the 7800 because it was backwards compatible. I kind of fell in love right from there. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and shortly after that we had gotten the Nintendo, and just being mesmerized by, Mario was an adventure at that point because there wasn't, you didn't have games like that. You didn't have a game where you could actually go through more than pretty much one screen. Frogger was one.
If you're going from Atari 2600 Pac-Man.
Frogger was one screen.
Yeah.
Even Pole Position was, it was a racing game, but the scenery never changed. It was a track and a background. Mario moved left to right.
Pitfall was probably the only like semi-advanced game.
Right, and
of that. And
I
it's
didn't
pretty
know
much the same thing over and over again.
You're right, and I didn't know of that game. So when Mario came around, and you just saw him kind of going through all these different scenes, and the scenes didn't repeat themselves. It wasn't like the same pattern on the first one was the same pattern on the second screen. And in fact, it was free flowing scrolling. It wasn't one screen to the next in sort of like a cut scenario where it would load in the new image. It was the screen was moving as Mario was moving. So to me, Super Mario Brothers is an adventure game. I mean, it was going from world to world. You had to go to the place where it was night. I think that was World 3. And you could go underwater to the underwater levels. There was the ice world.
Bloop, 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 bloop.
You know, you encountered new enemies as you went by, so that was kind of a revelation. But yeah, those are some of my really, really earliest memories of gaming. So, and that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about, is kind of exploring our past, and maybe some of you guys have had memories like that geez, you know, you think about it and say, you know, I can remember when I got my NES. So that's the goal of our podcast here, is to kind of revisit gaming's history through a 35-year-old's eyes. So this is going to really appeal to those who are anywhere between, you know, their late 20s to their early 40s, I would say. This is going to be a podcast for you guys to revisit. So we hope that, you know, we can be a part of your day once in a while, and put some smiles on your guys' faces. And we really love doing it, because it's actually a fun way for us to explore our past at the same time. So, anywho, why don't we get right into our topic for today? So our topic for today, after all that long-windedness, is the Sega 32X.
The greatest console to ever come out in 1994.
And that statement in and of itself is sort of not true, because the 32X is not a console in and of itself. The 32X is an add-on. It was an add-on to the Sega Genesis system. And today we want to explore a little bit about the history of the 32X, sort of the roots of the 32X. Where did it kind of come from? What was the, for lack of a better term, genesis of the
Oh.
You like that? Is that good? You know, we try to inject, you know, some comedy into this every once in a while, people. What was the start of the 32X, and what were the technical aspects of it? And then
Blast processing on top of blast processing.
You know, that kind of makes sense. Discuss a little bit about the launch of the 32X, some of the launch games, and then talk a little bit about maybe why it failed, and then give you guys some thoughts on how we feel about the 32X, and maybe some of our 32X memories growing up. So the 32X was released on November 21st, 1994. Did you know that this was coming out?
Geez, I don't even remember.
Because I had no idea when this was happening.
I mean, I had my Genesis. I think I had just gotten my Genesis.
You got your Genesis
I got
late.
it late, yeah. I got my Genesis like in 93 or 94, because I was in like 4th grade, I think. Because I got the Genesis, and I got it. Well, it didn't come with it, but the game it had just come out, which was Sonic and Knuckles.
Yeah.
And that's what I got with it. And I don't remember like hearing anything about it. I must have read it, because I had a subscription to Game Informer and Game Pro, and they were obviously talking about it.
You had a subscription to Game Informer and Game Pro in 1993?
Yeah, I must have. Yeah, I had a subscription because from
Really?
Funcoland. It was still Funcoland then.
It was.
Yeah.
But Funcoland had not started with Game Informer, as far as I know, at that point.
Yeah, they were.
Were they?
Yeah, because when I
See, I don't remember that.
when I got my Game Gear, that's when they signed me up for it. When I sold my Game Boy to get a Game Gear.
Oh, okay.
That's when I signed up for their 12-month subscription, because it was like $15 for the whole year. And, you know, you still got 10% off the games.
Gotcha.
I just don't remember reading about it. I'm sure I had to have, though. It must have been in the magazines. Okay. EGM.
Yeah,
and
see,
all those.
my very first magazine that I got as a subscription was the June issue of EGM. It had Sonic, Mario, and Crash on the cover.
Oh, well, you were that late into the magazine game?
That was, and honestly, that was probably, I must have had to send away for something, or given like a card from like one of my games, sent it in, or maybe some reply mail, because I didn't.
Oh, you got that like free 3-month subscription
or
something like that?
Because I didn't order it. It just came in. They must have had data on who I was and sent me.
Big Brother's watching.
Well, yeah, but I fell in love with it. I mean, it was just all this gaming news all in one place. I mean, those were fantastic. So at that point, I had already had a 32X, and you know, so you know.
Well, so how'd you have one then?
We'll get into that.
Oh.
We'll get into how that happened. Let's talk a little bit about the start of the 32X. So if we're going to talk about the 32X, I feel like we really need to talk about something that occurred a little bit before that. Sega, in my opinion, and Trent, I mean, you can chime in and give me your thoughts, but Sega was a risk taker. They always were, you know, and they always did the wild, wacky, different thing that nobody else would do. And
that's why they don't make consoles anymore.
Sometimes it would work, and a lot of times it didn't.
I would say one time it worked.
Yeah. So the first thing we need to talk about is the Super FX chip, which was created through by a collaboration between Argonaut Software and Nintendo. And this is what started all of the 3D games and 3D special effect games on the Super Nintendo. So you're talking about Stunt Race FX,
Star Fox.
You're talking about especially Star Fox. That's the key one.
That's what you're talking about.
Right. Sega sees this, and I'm not sure if they were already working on it at the time. The research I've done, some reports say that they were already working on some advancements. It basically led to them working with Samsung and some of their other partners to create something called the Sega Virtua Processor. This basically was an extra processing board that could boost the capabilities of the current hardware, which was the Genesis, to create polygonal graphics. And reportedly, it was, get this, it was anywhere between 300 and 500 polygons that this thing could push. So let that soak in for a second. So
I'm not even sure I know what that means.
Okay, so the 32X could push 50,000 textured polygons or 160,000 flat polygons. The Sega Saturn could push 500,000 flat polygons or 200,000 textured polygons. So if that gives you some context on sort of the capabilities of the system.
Context is king.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bischoff. So this chip relatively was not powerful, but at the time it could actually render polygons and actually do them at a reasonable clip. If you remember the Super FX chip and you remember games like Star Fox or Stunt Race FX, these games, good or bad, were notoriously slow. I mean, we're talking about frame rates in the teens and possibly lower depending on what was happening on screen. There was only one game released that utilized the SVP chip, and that was Virtua Racing, which came out in, I believe, 1993.
It was only $100 when it came out.
It was $99.99 when it came out. It utilized the SVP chip. And if you play that game today, or if you look on YouTube and look at clips of the Genesis version of Virtua Racing, it runs comparatively to Super FX games very smoothly. I mean, the frame rates are typically, pretty stable, and it's running definitely higher than what the Super FX games were doing at the time.
It's that blast processing.
Nope, it's the SVP chip that allowed it to do that. But the price was so prohibitive. I mean, $100 for a cartridge. The thing was like 2 times the size of a Genesis cartridge itself. There were plans to release a standalone SVP cartridge, almost like think of Sonic and Knuckles. So Sonic and Knuckles is a cartridge that has sort of a cartridge port on top of it. So there were plans to possibly release the SVP chip board as a standalone cartridge that you would then plug in to the Genesis, and then 32X enabled games would plug in on top of it. I know that Daytona USA was originally planned as a game. So there were thoughts of maybe we can make the SVP chip that next solution, kind of to bridge the gap. Of course, Sega being Sega, that wasn't good enough. They wanted to go full bore into something else.
They were like,
Right. So, they saw the capabilities that this did to boost the Genesis, and you have to remember, going back to that point, North America was such a lucrative market for Sega that, it's hard for companies to want to give up a piece of hardware that they have that's doing well, that's typically winning in the market or doing very well in the market and making the company lots of money. They want that hardware to last as long as they can possibly get it to last. There are many that believe that the only reason why Nintendo ended up releasing the Super Nintendo in North America when they did is because the Genesis was doing so well, and so at that point they had to release it and had to give up, the majority of support to the original NES because they had to compete with hardware that was actually coming in and encroaching on their business. So Sega having a console that was very, very lucrative to them and probably definitely their most successful console at the time, to that date, wanted to keep it going. So fast forward to there was a consumer electronics show, CES, that would always occur once in the wintertime and once in the summertime. And this was basically all different kinds of electronics coming together at a show where they would show it to sort of the public, to magazines, and kind of the up-and-coming new products that were going to be available. And at CES 1994, in the wintertime, there was a meeting that was held, and Sega of Japan and Sega of America came together, and Sega of Japan showed them this idea that they had, that they wanted basically Sega of America to design a hardware solution that could keep the Genesis going, and they said, here you go, here's the design specs of the chips we want to use, make it work. And the guy at the center of this whole thing is a guy named Joe Miller. He was the senior vice president of product development at Sega of America. He was there between 1992 and 1996, and he basically oversaw any American-made or developed games for Sega. So nothing that was from Japan. If it was Shinobi, that wasn't his jurisdiction. Shinobi was made and it was sent over to America. He was in charge of things like Echo the Dolphin, right? Games that were made by American studios for the Sega Genesis. He was one of the guys who spearheaded the Sega Channel in 1995. Sega Channel was basically a download service where you could download games through a phone cord, and also was one of the guys who helped with the start of Sega Soft, which was a publisher that would publish Sega games on Sega consoles. So at this point, CES 1994, he's tasked with designing essentially what would amount and turn into the 32X. And so it utilized these chips called the SH2 CPUs. They were a dual CPU system by Hitachi. Hitachi was the provider of the chips. Interestingly enough, the same two chips that are in the 32X are the two chips that power the Sega Saturn. It's just that the Saturns are clocked up a little bit. There's a few more megahertz that they're clocked up. And when pressed about this, Joe did an interview a couple of years ago with Ken Horowitz from Sega 16, and so that's where a lot of this information is coming. And so Joe was basically tasked with doing this because Sega of Japan really thought of the 32X as sort of a breeding ground for Saturn development. It was a place where developers could get some software created and then eventually learn the ropes of these two processors and start developing games for the Sega Saturn. Keep in mind that the Sega Saturn, by the time the 32X was released, the Saturn was already released in Japan.
They come out like the same time?
So the Saturn came out in
Japan, I mean.
In Japan, the Saturn came out, I believe, it was late 1994, and then right after, in I believe January of 95, is when the 32X came out, believe it or not, in Japan. So in North America, we got the 32X first.
Yeah.
And the whole idea, the whole way that this was marketed and pitched was that the 32X was going to be a cheaper solution into the 32-bit era. It was $150 to buy the 32X, so much less than what the Saturn was going to cost, which was estimated at $400, and get 32-bit arcade quality games, 32-bit arcade quality color. It had scaling, rotation, a lot of the things that, to be honest, the Super Nintendo had already had, but they sort of wanted to push this. And again, the whole idea was, behind the scenes, was to get developers in tune so that they could start developing for Saturn. Initially, this actually worked out really well. At launch, which again was November 21st, 1994, it's rumored that there was about 1 million, there was about demand for about 1 million units. And Sega was not able to fulfill that order. They were only able to fulfill about half. 500,000 were shipped, or about 100,000 were shipped. And initially, the hardware got rave reviews. I mean, reviewers loved it. They thought it was fantastic. The two launch games for the 32X were Star Wars Arcade, which was an arcade game, and Doom. And at the time, there wasn't really an experience that could sort of match that in the home. You did have the 3DO that had been released, and you had the Atari Jaguar, but in terms of Sega's might in the industry and brand recognition, as well as the quality of those two games at the time, it was reviewed very, very well. So initially, it got a lot of good credit. So going into a little bit of why it failed, again, we talked about how Saturn was going to be eminently released the following year. And of course, there's the notorious first E3 where Tom Kalinske gets on stage and announces that Saturn is ready that day at select retailers. It was supposed to be released on Saturn Day, which was a Saturday at the end of the year, and of course it wasn't. It was stealthily launched, and the reason was that Sega of Japan wanted they were in my opinion, terrified of Sony at the time. And they wanted to get this console out first because they remembered that they got the Genesis out well before the Super Nintendo, and that actually helped them. The one thing that they also had was really quality software at that point that sustained, that they were willing to support. And so the Saturn gets launched early, and now you've got a competition. You've got two 32-bit essentially two 32-bit consoles. Absolutely.
If you stack them together, it's 64 bits.
Well, you can't use the Saturn with 32X at the same time. I'm going to take a break, take a sip of air here. Any thoughts, Trenton, that you have on sort of anything that we've talked about so far? Did you know any of this before we sat down for the podcast?
No.
Okay.
I didn't really know what led up to the 32X. I just remember reading about how the Saturn came out like basically at the same time of the 32X. So it was pretty much like
6 months later.
A failed system to be like
6
before it
months
even
later,
came out. Cuz didn't Sega Japan want nothing to do with it? With
the 32X?
Yeah.
Well, so the Genesis was not successful. It's called the Mega Drive in Japan, and it was not successful. It was actually the third most popular console over in Japan behind the PC Engine, which is our TurboGrafx 16, and then the Super Nintendo. So they were running in third place already. They were really excited to kind of get rid of the Genesis and move on to Saturn, whereas in America we were really doing well with the Genesis was doing well. So you have the Genesis, you have the 32X, and you have the Saturn all at the same time, and really, in my opinion, kind of cannibalizing one another, because the messaging is so mixed at that point as to, well, what should I really be buying here? And let's not forget that the Sega CD was not the most popular console. In fact, it was really expensive.
Get out of here.
And they were pushing FMV, which burned a lot of people there. Now, I'm not saying that was even the beginning of the end there, but the 32X was something that could have had some good support, but almost immediately Sega stopped supporting it. And when you make a promise to a consumer that you're going to be supporting something, and then ultimately pull the plug about 6 months in, consumers aren't going to be too happy.
It only had 40 games or something like that.
40 or 45 games were officially released for the 32X, and a lot of times they were either inferior versions of Sega CD or Genesis games, or marginally
just like
improved.
The same exact game.
Marginally improved. In some cases, they were better. You look at a game like.
But why spend another $60 on the same game?
Well, Right. So I mean, it was really hard to differentiate. If you look at WWF the arcade game or WrestleMania the arcade game on the Genesis and compare it to the 32X through a magazine picture, they're gonna look similar enough that you're not gonna say, I need to shell out $150 to get this other console. In the meantime, they already know that the Saturn's gonna be coming out in a few months. It was just a lot of mixed messaging. And although Sega Japan's intent was, very thoughtful in the way that they wanted to get developers used to the architecture, in the end they just confused and upset their consumer base and really lost the goodwill that they had, because consumers are fickle, and when you have another option that is cool, that's hip, that's ready to be there, that's cheaper, that doesn't have mixed messaging, the consumers are going to have an easy decision on what to do. Now, it has nothing to do with where I stand and my beliefs on what I love or the consoles that I love or the games that I love, but we all know what happened, and the PlayStation ended up prevailing in that whole scenario, and Sega really kind of fumbled the ball, if you will.
They really dropped the ball.
Which is sad, because you look at the 32X, and there's potential there. It's a fun little add-on. I mean, who owns a 32X today that doesn't think it's the coolest thing? No.
I don't know about that.
Well, you know what they call a Sega CD, a Genesis, and a 32X stacked on top of it, right?
No, what do they call it?
They call it the Voltron. They call it the Voltron, my friend.
And then you put the Game Genie in the 32X with Knuckles, Sonic and Knuckles on top of that.
Do you remember when I
took
took a picture? Do you remember when I took a picture of? I took a picture of
stacks on stacks.
It was because I own a Model 1 Sega CD and a Model 1 Genesis, and then the 32X, and I think I put Sonic and Knuckles, and then I put a Master System on top of that.
The converter?
Yeah, a power-based converter. And then I put a Master System game inside of that. And it was...
Now you're playing with power. You turn it on, it just blows up.
In hindsight, it was probably dangerous, because I probably could have bent the pins pretty far. But at the time, it was just like the funniest shit to do. You know what I mean?
How many add-ons did Nintendo have?
Well, they came close. Maybe we'll explore that in the podcast. But... going back to it, talking about mixed messaging, at the time, Sega was supporting the Sega Genesis / the Sega CD. They had released the SVP processor. They were still developing Game Gear games. Heck, they were still developing and supporting the Master System in some territories. They had PC development that had started. They released Sonic CD on PCs at that point. They had, if you remember, they had the Sega Pico, which was the child system. It had a pen, and you basically could plug in these cartridges that looked like books.
Like a leapfrog system, basically.
Sort of. And you could turn the pages, and it's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who has nothing to do with...
You don't have any other friends.
Right. An acquaintance through work.
Someone smiled at me.
And she was saying that she remembers she had this device.
Oh, it's a female? Now you're lying.
Yeah. I might be lying. I might be making this up. But she remembered. Allegedly, she remembered this device that had a book that you could turn the pages. So a lot of kids had that at the time.
Who?
If I met somebody who had it.
I know, with the one person that probably had it.
The Pico was more popular than you give it any credit for. I think it was a well-marketed product. It was a little early. It was a little before its time, I think, which was Sega. I mean, that was Sega. They were before their time in a lot of stuff. Anyways, they were supporting. They had produced the Nomad, which was the portable Genesis.
But I mean, they didn't really have to do. I mean,
no,
they just made it. It wasn't something they had to make games for.
No, but you think about it, all told, including the 32X and the Saturn, you're talking about maybe 7 platforms.
Buy our systems.
7 platforms that you're supporting. It's too much. It's too much to handle.
Too much tuna.
It was like a reverse pyramid. They were just crushed under their own weight. And at one point they were thinking about developing an all-in-one 32X, which was called the Neptune, because Sega loved planets. And the Neptune would have been an all-in-one Genesis 32X unit.
It looked like the Retron 5, but it was all Genesis related games.
It looked like a Genesis 2.
No, yeah.
It looked like a Genesis 2, with just the components.
I would have wanted that.
I don't know if you know, but there are certain modders that have actually gotten that to work, where they've took the components of the 32X and sandwiched them into a Genesis 2.
Why not?
Well, we're in the age of do it.
No, I know.
Do it because you can.
Yeah.
You know, if we can do it, if we can if we can make something happen, just do it, just to see if you can do it. You know who Ben Heck is?
No.
All right, it doesn't matter. He's a YouTuber who tried to basically create a Frankenstein system of a ColecoVision or a ColecoVision, a Sega Mark I, and like another console, and just kind of like sandwich them all together.
Just what the world needs.
Just because you could. Just because you could. And one of the interesting things about the 32X is, going back to what Joe Miller said, that kind of having the 32X as a breeding ground for future Saturn software, there were some interesting canceled games or demos that came out. There was a planned Alien vs Predator, if you remember. There was a Alien vs Predator beat 'em up that was supposed to come out. That never materialized. There was Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which was popular on 3DO. That was apparently supposed to come out.
I feel like all the canceled games were probably better than the games that were actually released.
You might be right about that. The next one, really interesting, was called Castlevania: The Bloodletting. And some of the sprites that were in this game, believe it or not, ended up influencing what happened in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So we very well could have missed out on that game being released on the 32X.
I said they'd probably be like $400 now.
What?
They put a Castlevania game on the 32X.
Oh, if they did, yeah. Well,
be up there with Spider-Man.
Web of Fire, and apparently that's not a great game.
No.
There was going to be a Shinobi game, which by all accounts ended up becoming Shinobi Legions, which ended up coming out on the Saturn, and Virtua Hamster.
Oh yeah, who could forget?
Yeah. Of course.
That would have been a classic.
Leave it to Sega to come out with a.
They would have been
game
on their 8th sequel by now.
Involving a hamster running through pipes. We'll have to revisit that someday.
Yeah, I saw that episode on South Park.
What?
Oh, Jesus Christ. They had the hamster go up his butt.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you talking about
the underpants gnomes?
Yeah. But there's the gay stripper guy with the police hat.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well,
that's where they got the idea from, Virtua Hamster.
No way. There was also the last thing, and the thing I find most interesting is that there was a
arousing.
Sometimes there was a flight demo that resembled what would eventually become Panzer Dragoon that was created. Now, there's reports that say that it was for the 32X. My thought on this whole thing is that there were demos that were created that just involved what could possibly be done with these dual SH2 CPU processors.
Wasn't there
and it ended up becoming Panzer Dragoon. I don't know if it was necessarily started on the 32X, but it used that architecture, and it was there's like a 10-second clip that you can find online, and it's all just single shaded polygons with a sort of like an airplane flying through what looks like Stonehenge structures, which really looks close to what Panzer Dragoon ended up becoming. Did you have a comment? Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think I was gonna say wasn't one of the games. Didn't they make a canceled game? It kind of was like a wave race game.
A wave race game.
It was like a jet ski game. I thought for 32X is one of the canceled games. I could be wrong though.
I don't remember that. I don't recall a wave racing game. You're not thinking of like Jet Moto, are you?
No.
For PlayStation. There were a lot of Sega games in the arcades at the time. There was a Wave Runner game.
Yeah. No, but I was thinking of another canceled game that they were gonna make. Darkstalkers.
That was
fighting game.
that was one of the canceled games that they were planning on. It was Darkstalkers. Now we eventually got Vampire Savior on Saturn. But yeah, there were major publishers that were on board. There was you had Konami, you had Capcom, you had which were pretty much the two major players at the time. I think when you talk about third parties, you wanted Capcom and Konami. If you had Capcom and Konami
back then,
you would be taken seriously.
It's a wrap.
If you didn't have them, you were going to be launched into probably obscurity or a niche that would be hard to come out of. Those were two. You can't deny the might of those two publishers at the time. And look where Konami has gotten to today.
I still wish they would have made that Alien vs. Predator game.
They would have been the only release of that game. Jet Ski Rage. I have never heard of that game. Well, that's a first.
Yeah, I thought I had heard of it.
Okay. I had never heard of Jet Ski Rage before. We'll have to look that up later. Some of the key games that came out, as I mentioned before, Doom was a launch game. Star Wars was also a launch game. And then Virtua Fighter and Virtua Racing. You can't mention the 32X without mentioning those two games, because those were really the ones that said, oh my gosh, this is a next generation type of a hardware system. Virtua Racing came out very, very close to launch, I believe. And it was one of those things where, yeah, you had the Genesis version, but you saw this one that came out on 32X, and it looked like the arcade. I mean, it wasn't, but it really looked very, very close, and it was one of those selling points for the system. And one of the reasons why it got any kind of sales that it got in the beginning was attributed to things like Doom and Virtua Racing at the time. Virtua Fighter ended up not coming out until very, very late in the 32X lifetime. Towards the end. Oh, Jeffrey? I win! It's funny, you look back at Virtua Fighter now on 32X, and their hands are mallets. They're literally meat mallets. But it didn't matter.
It's a no gravity game.
It didn't matter.
They float everywhere.
So, what are your earliest memories of the 32X? How did you hear about it? And when did you
like I said, I don't remember. I don't even remember hearing about it. And the one I got it was when it was on like clearance at Caldor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's when I got it. I think it was like 50.
For $25?
No, I think it was 50. It was either 50 or like $79.99. And I might have got it for like my birthday. It was like.
Now, did that come with Doom? Did you get Doom with it?
Yeah, I have the picture. Remember on Christmas when I'm holding up like my copy of Doom for 32X.
Mm-hmm. You look so enthused.
But I don't. Cause yeah, I got. Well, I mean, it's not to say that because it was only like 6 months before it was dead in the water.
You actually look confused in that picture. Like you were holding it up like your mom told you to, and you still weren't sure what it was that you were holding up.
Well, no, because it was one of I picked it out. At least I think I did, because I remember that. I don't know if you remember going to Caldor when they just had at the end of the aisle, they just had like a wall of 32X.
No, I know what you mean.
Build that wall. Just 32X's everywhere.
I actually remember it towards the front of the store. There was like a little like a floating kiosk that had them just.
Oh no! I remember seeing them in the electronics section in the back at the end of the aisle, and it was they might have been $79.99, because I think it was when it was first like announced that they had like discontinued it.
So probably late 95.
Yeah, because if I got Doom for Christmas, then it must have been.
Yeah.
It must have been around then.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get it when it first came out. Because like I said before, I don't remember even really hearing about it. And then I think it already came out. I know a couple of my friends had gotten a PlayStation by then. And then I just for some reason I wanted a 32X. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And I just remember getting Doom. I honestly don't remember even playing the game. The only game I remember really playing a lot was the WWF Raw for 32X, and I got that at Walmart in there. I don't know if you remember the Walmart back then. They had that huge like bargain bin of games, And yeah,
Treasure
I
trove.
was just digging. It was like the $5 movie bin, but it was
Right.
video games back then.
Right.
And
Who can
I
forget
grabbed,
about the $5 movie bin?
I mean, it's still there.
Going to Walmart at like 1 in the morning in the summertime when you get in that, you have your driver's license and you're in high school. You got nothing better to do. Well, let's go to Wendy's. Let's get a spicy chicken sandwich, and then we'll go over to Walmart and check out the movies, and see Tyler Griffin stacking the shelves in the freezer section. Oh my God. See, this is what I'm talking about. You know, just like those kind of memories. Oh man.
Well, yeah, but the video games one, they weren't $5, but I remember getting WWF Raw for like $20. They had a bunch of 32X games in there. So the first games I had was that Doom. I had Metalhead, but I don't remember playing that one too much. I had Zaxxon's Mother Base, and I don't know however you want to pronounce it, Colibri.
Whatever.
Yeah, and Virtua Fighter.
And Virtua Fighter.
And I played Virtua Fighter a lot.
I mean, why wouldn't you though? I mean, it might be the best game on the system. You know?
I don't know if I had Virtua Racing, but all these I'm pretty sure I got all those at Walmart in their like clearance bin. They were all like $20.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, the only way that I got any sort of gaming news, where I grew up in my town, I lived next to one of my best friends growing up, and I still consider him one of my best friends, Matt. And Matt was a Sega head. He had 2 older brothers that were about 10 years older than us. Matt was about a year or 2 older than me, but his brothers, it was like the tale of 2 families. You know, like his mom and dad had 2 kids, and then decided like 30 years later to have 2 more kids. When I say 30 years, I mean like
5.
Like 10, honestly, like 10 years later.
Yeah.
It was almost like they had another family. They had these 2 younger kids, and one of which was Katie, who Katie was in the same grade as me. We were, you know, again, really, really close as we were growing up. We would always go down to the river and, catch like 20 frogs at a time and keep them in a bucket and
then blow them up.
Yeah. No, we didn't do that. That was the sunfish down at the 10 Mile River. We used to blow up those fish. Not all the time. It happened a couple of times. Yeah. Most of it was this guy Nate Kitchen, who was insane. Who I remember bringing black cats down, and
what do you just literally black cats?
No, like the firecrackers.
So what are you talking about?
Like the fire, the firecracker. I call them black cats. I don't know. I think that was like a brand name of them.
I've never.
But
heard
he would
that.
bring these little tiny firecrackers. You know those tiny little.
I know.
Ones with the little wick, and then they
that's all of them.
They blow up. Well, it's like a little cylinder.
You know those firecrackers with the wick you got to light and then they blow up? No, tell me more.
But you know what I mean. It's like a little cylinder. It's probably like an inch or 2 long.
Yeah, that's every firecracker. I got it.
It's not every firecracker. Some people buy Roman candles, Anyways, he would shove these firecrackers in their mouths. Oh my lord! Light them, and you have to throw them quick. And
yeah.
He would throw them in the air, and it would just be raining guts. I mean, it was. This kid was nuts. I mean, I was more of a spectator to it. I was like, this kid's insane. I actually don't think I ever put a firecracker in a fish's mouth, but it was like watching a train wreck. You know what I mean? How did we get here? We were talking about Matt.
You're talking about Virtua Fighter, and then it just.
Listen, it's okay. It's very conversational. If we go off on tangents, that's okay. So Matt's older brothers, they grew up with the Master System. And so
the only family to grow up with the Master System.
We'll talk about that another day. But anyways, they bought Game Pros from time to time. And Matt, I remember one day we were on the bus going to school, and he's like, "You gotta hear about this. They're coming out with this new thing. Sega's coming out with this 32-bit console. It's called the 32X. They're gonna have Virtua Fighter on it." And we remember going to parties at High Scores, which was an arcade in South Windsor. And then we used to go to Time Out, which was in the Buckland Hills Mall in Manchester, Connecticut. And I think they had a unit there. So we knew a Virtua Fighter.
I remember me and a couple of my friends, we used to ride our bikes to ECSU, and they had
That's Eastern Connecticut State University.
they
for people who don't know.
had a Virtua Fighter arcade cabinet there, and we
You
would
rode
just,
your bikes to Eastern just for that?
I mean,
You're on Mansfield
I
Ave.
lived like 2
So
miles
you were
away.
close. Yeah.
Yeah, we would just ride our bikes just to play. I think that was like the only. It was random. It wasn't like an arcade room. They just had a Virtua Fighter cabinet. We would just go there and
Just
play
in like
it
the lobby or
for
whatever.
like an hour. Or
Why
two.
wouldn't you though?
Yeah.
Who'd you play as?
I can't remember. I can't even remember
Jeffrey?
their names. The wrestler.
Oh, Wolf.
Wolf. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Yep.
Anyway, so the whole draw for us, I can remember at the time, was Virtua Fighter, and it was, that was the game that we wanted to have. It was, first of all, it was 3D, which was blew our minds.
Yeah, that was like one of the
and
first.
It was a
3D
really
games,
it was
like
it was the
fighting.
first 3D polygonal fighting game.
Yeah.
And it was a damn good one to start out that whole thing. And we just had to have it. So when we heard when he heard from his brothers that this was coming out, we were anticipating it. Now I had no money as a little kid, so I mean I was probably 10 years old at the time, and there was no way I was gonna ask my mom for to buy me the 32X, which was gonna be coming. I didn't even know when it was coming out, but Matt and his brothers got it when it had first come out in late 1994, and I can remember going to Matt's house on the weekends and just watching them play Star Wars Arcade or watching them play Virtua Racing, which had just recently come out, and you were just mesmerized. I mean, you looked at the screen and you were like, I those feelings when you're looking at something, and we don't get these things today where you see a new system and it's like you're blown away the way you were back then.
Well, no, because
the advancements back then were so wide.
It's like 1080p to 4K. It's like
right.
It's not
right.
that you don't really.
Today
notice
you have people arguing about the resolution difference between an Xbox game and a PS4 game. Back then we had a lot more to argue about.
These kids, they don't understand.
But it was just it was hard to look away from the screen because you couldn't believe what you were seeing. You couldn't believe that you had the arcade literally in your home. You had a Virtua Fighter game or in this case Virtua Racing, the way it was really meant to be.
Virtua Racing.
I will correct you there. It's Virtua Racing. And most people believe that it's widely held that the 32X version of Virtua Racing is the best one. It did come out on the Saturn as well, but by and large people think of the 32X as the definitive version of that game. And it was a fantastic version of it. We would just race and try to beat each other's laps. And, it was kind of that first foray into 3D. When you think about it, everything up until then was two-dimensional, side-scrolling or top-down. And the 32X was sort of a revelation. It was the we had broken the walls down into 3D gaming. And you dreamt about the possibilities of what could possibly be, and the 32X was that even for a short time. The 32X provided that. I can remember I had saved up my money, and it took a while because I wasn't, I was still only a kid, and you only got money for sometimes your birthdays or Christmas. And I can remember it being early 1995. The 32X had been discounted at Babbage's in the Buckland Hills Mall to $99, and so I saved up my money. My mom, it was like a school night, I think, and I was
Put it on layaway.
I was like, Mom, can we go? They have one left. Can we go? Now, I'm not knowing that this thing is basically on its last legs and about to fail because you weren't
it's
privy.
a good deal.
You weren't privy to that. You didn't know what was coming up really, and especially if you weren't getting any of the magazines, you didn't know. I was 11 years old, and all I knew was that I wanted it and I wanted to play Doom. Doom was an amazing game at the time, and that was really one of the best versions that you could play. Most people probably don't know, but if you didn't have a PC, you really couldn't play Doom. I mean, you had to either have a 3DO, which cost $800, or you had to own an Atari Jaguar, which were both at the time more expensive than the 32X. Which
let's get on that sick version on the Super Nintendo.
It wasn't even on our radar. But I finally saved up the money. I think I was I could be blowing, I could be making this up, but I think I was like $10 short, and my mom threw in the $10 plus the tax, and we got it. We got it. I had it in the car, and I literally I can't describe how excited I was to get this thing home. So what do you think happened when we got home?
You couldn't connect it to your system.
We couldn't set the fucker up.
Actually, that happened to me too.
We could not set it up. I have never called Sega of America. Like the tip line?
Yeah.
We had to call Sega of America.
No, I had the same issue because I had the Model 1 and it wouldn't work because you had to have a different cord.
The cord.
Yeah.
So
which was in the manual.
Yeah. So, in fact, I don't even think I was able to set it up that night.
I couldn't either. No, I had the same issue.
We couldn't set it up, so we waited until I think it was the next day, which was a Friday, and I can remember. Do you know Devin Ramsey?
Yeah.
So Devin was over my house, and I can remember we finally got on the phone with Sega of America, and we couldn't get the fucking clips into the Genesis 1. We were so petrified and worried that we were going to ruin either the Genesis or the 32X if we didn't have these clips in right, that
all it did was hold down the little flap. That's all.
My fingers bled. I cut my fingers open with the fucking metal clips because I was trying to fit them in and we didn't know how to do it. And I can remember I had to wash my hands out because I was bleeding. And we called Sega of America. And you know what they told us? I'll never forget this. The guy goes, you don't use those clips. Just put the system in and see if it works. He goes,
he's like, while you're throwing the clips out, just throw the 32X in there too. we canceled it actually. So there's a good tip for you.
They obviously were still supporting it because they helped us, but I remember seeing Doom flash on the screen and the guy, the Doom guy, start to shoot one of the imps, and it was like, holy crap, this is amazing. We finally got the clips in, and we got the system in there. That's when I knew something was up, though. I was like, we can use this thing without the clips, can't we? But to this day, I almost feel weird about not using the clips. I don't know what it is, but I have this thing inside of me where I want to make sure that the clips are in the Genesis. I don't know if it's just nostalgia, of that moment in time.
I want to bleed like I did then.
Yeah, I seriously bled for the 32X. And the sad ending of this, I actually did get Virtua Fighter after it had come out. I think it was on clearance, and it was a box set that had it had the 32X version of Virtua Fighter. It had a T-shirt that had all the characters on it, said Virtua Fighter, and then 32X in the background, and it had an instructional tape that taught you how to do the moves.
Oh, the VHS tape?
The VHS tape. I owned the Virtua Fighter VHS tape, which is probably still at my parents' house. But I remember watching it, and just not even watching it because I wanted to see the moves, just because I was hyping myself for playing this game. I just wanted to watch the tape. And then, so I really enjoyed my time with the 32X, and I can't even say that I thought it was a bad investment. The moment I knew it was a bad investment was when I saw the PlayStation. Only because I had only gotten it that year, and we were at Champ Sports. If anybody knows Champ Sports, like a for basketball.
Foot Locker.
Like a Foot Locker, and they were giving out these little magazines from EA Sports talking about all of the hardware that was out and some of the games that were going to be available. And there was the PlayStation, and they had glowed that the PlayStation was the next thing, and you had to own it. And it was already out. It had come out in late 1995, and it was there. You could buy it. And they they showed some of the pictures, and it just looked amazing. And I was like, I need to have this thing now. Well, what am I going to do? I already just bought the 32X. So I had kept my box. I had kept my receipt. I go down to Babbage's with my 32X. I'll never forget. My mom took me. She goes, "You just bought this thing. You want to return it now?" And
how long did you have it?
I had it for 6 months or 8 months. And I'll never forget going down to Babbage's. Now I packed up everything neat. I had my receipt still. It was from the box, and
it's only 6 months ago. No big deal.
So I handed it over. I'm like, yeah, I bought this, and I actually don't really I don't want it. I wanted to see if I could get a return and get my money back. And back at the time, you could do something like that. Nowadays, if it's open, typically you're not going to be able to return something. But he looks at the receipt and he looks around like he's not sure what to do because he sees this kid who's got like, basically holding the weight of the world, in front of him, just hoping that this guy's going to take this back, and he can see my expression probably. And at the same time doesn't want to get in trouble for taking back something that is too old. And he's just like, yeah, I don't know if we can take this. And I'm like, please, I don't want it. Please, can you do something? And he goes, let me see what I can do. So
here's $20.
He ends up fully refunding me for the 32X. I get the $105 or whatever it is back. I put that in my kitty. I save a bunch of money. I think I sold a few games, and then eventually I went down to Funko and I got a used version of a PlayStation, and I regretted it. Only a year or two later, I wanted my 32X back because I missed playing those 32X games that were so amazing, and I remember getting hyped up for when Matt and his brothers were talking about it. So I ended up getting another one in 1998, and that's the one that I have until today that I've been using ever since. So that's my
match made in heaven.
That's my 32X.
It was just meant to be.
That's my 32X story. So.
What does they say? If you let something go, and it comes back to you, it's meant to be.
It's meant to be. It's true love.
Yeah.
32X is true
I let
love.
it go for a while, and it came back.
It's just one of those things. Like Sega as a company, the 32X is just, it's such an oddity. It's almost like that lost puppy. It's like it's like Frankenstein. They put it out there and then they abandoned it, and it's like it's hard not to feel bad for it, because it had potential, but at the same time there was no way it was going to succeed given
before it even came out.
Given the environment that it was released in. So it's kind of like a paradox, the system, but there are some good games on it. There's not a ton of games. A lot of it's shovelware, a lot of it's crap. Well, I shouldn't say shovelware, but a lot of it is not that good. But the games that are good are really good.
If they would have put out like a Sonic game with it,
a real Sonic game. You're not talking about
no.
Knuckles Chaotix.
No, literally when it came out.
Yeah.
That would have definitely helped.
But it's still, I argue that it still wouldn't have done anything because you had the Saturn right there.
No, I know.
The Saturn was launched with Daytona USA. It was launched with a, technically a better version of Virtua Fighter, even though it was very, very glitchy and flawed. It was technically a better version. It had Panzer Dragoon that came out. That was a launch game. It had Clockwork Knight. It had momentum. It had some momentum at the time. The 32X was a failed system, in my opinion, before it even came out. And the 32X really is the start, in my opinion, of the beginning of the end for Sega. And we'll hopefully get to the other stories. I'm not sure how often we want to do these. I've had a lot of fun this first one. I'd like to do more of them, and kind of travel down memory lane with you guys and just explore our gaming past. We're big fans of Nintendo. We're big fans of Sega, and some of the other consoles that came out, PlayStation and such. And we'd love to revisit this with you guys and kind of go down memory lane and kind of build on this a little bit. So if you guys have any suggestions or you have any comments or thoughts, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us by email at theturboduo@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram, and our name there is The Turbo Duo, all one word. We also have a few videos up on YouTube as The Turbo Duo, again, all one word. You can find us there.
No, that's not all one word. You have to type in The Turbo Duo. Yeah.
Separately?
We're not big enough to have our own name.
Oh, so when you type in is it separate, like The Turbo Duo?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not all one word.
We haven't got to that upper echelon yet in YouTube glory where you can have your own youtube.com/The Turbo Duo. Understood. Well, honestly, guys, it's not really about that. It's really just about kind of reconnecting with our past and exploring some of this stuff, because it really is very interesting. A lot of video game history tells a story, and
and you know, kind of where we were and how we got to where we are today, and kind of some of the connections that we have. Video games are sort of a conduit to our memories and to the things that connect us to our friends. Trenton and I met when we were 15 in high school, and I can remember the first time I went over your house, we played Kung Fu Heroes. I'm like, you know what? This dude's okay. Now, I don't know if I've played Kung Fu Heroes on Nintendo since then.
I still have it, yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
But I remember going to your house. That was, I think, one of the first games we played.
I was probably like, yo, I played this game like way back. My friend had it, and now you got to play it.
Right. So, I mean, it's that kind of stuff that binds us.
I didn't even remember that.
Yeah. Do you remember it now?
No, yeah, I do now.
That was the first time I think I slept over your house. We were playing Kung Fu Heroes and on the floor. Okay. That's your decision to interject that. Just to let you guys know, I'm a happily married man. I don't have to prove anything. And with that, we'll close up this episode of the podcast. Thank you guys for listening, and
we're gonna have a nightcap of a 3-hour round robin tournament in Cosmic Carnage.
Let's get it.
Yeah.
Peace. See you guys later.
Where is it? Where is it?
Man, I look good. Ooh, shake it, baby.
Do that.
Shake it, baby.
I'm gonna record something. Oh, that was two straight men playing Duke Nukem on Sega Saturn.